Hi everybody, welcome to Presentation Skills basically 101. In this slide deck and this presentation, we'll go through what it takes to prepare and present effective presentations, how to maintain audience interest and engage them. So if we go through the introduction onto the agenda, we're looking at 6 modules that we're going to be covering. Obviously, we'll go through the introduction, we'll look at presentation preparation, maintaining audience interest, body language and voice control when presenting face-to-face as well as telephonically, managing audience expectations and interaction, and then we'll conclude with a call to action. The objectives for this training course is to plan and prepare a well-structured presentation. We need to develop techniques that reduce anxiety and deliver presentations with confidence and ensure that our nerves work for us when we are presenting to a group of people. We need to create and maintain audience interest to ensure that the message we are delivering is of interest to the audience and make sure that they remain engaged throughout the presentation. We're going to learn how to use effective verbal and nonverbal communication techniques, as well as for managing audience interactions as well. We'll move on to our presentation preparation. There are many things that we need to consider when we're preparing a presentation. There's a lot of information we need to gather. One of the key things that we need to understand is what do we want to achieve with the presentation? What is the end result? The actual purpose of it. We need to also think about the environment and the logistics as well, which is where and how you will make the presentation. We need to look at the audience DNA, as well as the time available that we have to present. If we have a look at audience DNA, DNA stands for, the D stands for demographics, which is the geographical location, the culture, maturity, role, and level within the company, and knowledge about the subject of the presentation. The needs of the audience, what do they actually need from the presentation? How much knowledge do they have already, and how much knowledge do they need to gain from the presentation? And the A stands for the attitude. Are they supportive? Are they excited? Or do they need to be convinced? When preparing a presentation, it's important to take some time to assess your audience. You can use templates for assessment and preparation as well. One needs to ask oneself the question, how successful was my last presentation? Could we perhaps have prepared more? And what type of things went right or wrong in previous presentations to ensure that the presentation is more effective the second time around? There are 6 key questions that we need to ask ourselves when preparing for a presentation. The first question being who. Consider who will be in the audience and what they are interested in, what they already know, and what their attitude is likely to be about your presentation. And are there any cultural considerations you need to consider? What? Know your key points for supporting data and desired outcomes. Include convincing elements, and end with a call to action. A call to action is vitally important as it indicates commitment to the presentation as well. Where? Work out any logistics and supplies for the presentation. When? How much advance notice you have versus how much preparation time you will need. Consider the time of day and any impacts to the audience reaction. Ask why. Know what you want from the audience at the end of the presentation. Ask yourself, why this presentation? Why now? And how does it link to a larger initiative, if it does? The last question we need to ask ourselves is how. Know your delivery style, your strengths and your weaknesses, and how you will adjust to your audience, how you will prepare yourself mentally beforehand to increase your confidence. Audience success factors are critical. Your audience must understand you and your key message as well. Your audience must remember your message. Your audience must act on your message. And most important of all, your audience must tell others about your message. The audience will understand you because you've expressed yourself clearly and verified their understanding. They remember your key message because your messages are clear and concise and also match their interests. The audience acts on your messages because there's a call to action that is meaningful to them. And the audience tells others about your message because they have been motivated by the message. When one looks at presentation structure, we have a look at the opening, the messaging, and then the closing, each with its own subsection. The opening of the first few minutes, when you capture the audience's attention and set their expectations. Consider what you want your audience to think, feel, and do. How can you provide an attention-getting opening, but also transition to the messages so that everything links together? When we look at messaging, keep to 3 key points. Provide some data that supports them, and what are the benefits to the audience, so that the audience can ask the question, what is in it for me? From a closing point of view, we need to summarize the key points that we discussed in the presentation. We have to ask the audience then to take them to action. The action relates to the key points. Examples are following a process, providing information, performing a task, or achieving consensus on a plan. When we look at communicating the key messages, recent research indicates that people's short-term memory retains only 3 or 4 items at a time. This is one of the reasons why it's important to focus on 1 to 3 key messages. It also avoids confusion. The sentence that describes the key points in a PowerPoint slide or any other presentation medium should be short. It should be easy to understand so that their meaning is obvious as well. Match your key messages to the audience benefits by relating them to the interests and goals of the audience members. Supporting data varies according to the key messages. It can be examples, it could even be statistics, or it just could be additional information. You can also add detailed supporting data as a separate handout or in backup slides. This again lends more weight and credence to your presentation. When we have a look at tips for using PowerPoint slides, the goal of a slide is to convey your message to the audience. You can, however, also use flip charts or a whiteboard. We need to avoid distracting background colors or textures, and also only use slides that add real value. Too many slides can also be confusing, and it will also lose the audience's attention, as if they have to sit through a long PowerPoint slide, at times it can get a bit boring. Use a limited number of sentences and words on each slide. Short bulleted sentences are more effective than lengthy text. A picture, diagram, or graphic can demonstrate processes or relationships more effectively than words can. Avoid using meaningless clip art or cartoon. Use only diagrams that are relevant to the message that you are trying to convey. And of course, avoid infringing any copyright as well. When we move on to handling presentation anxiety, it is normal to be nervous before a presentation. If you weren't nervous, it means you probably aren't properly prepared, or you don't have a clue what you're talking about. Preparation and practice are very important for handling anxiety. If you have spent time preparing and practicing, you will feel more confident. Prepare the location in advance. If it is a location with which we are familiar, you should still spend a little time checking it out before you begin. If it is a location with which you are unfamiliar, then you need to examine it beforehand if possible. Preparing yourself is also vitally important. One needs to practice the presentation. One can practice it to yourself. You can practice it on your colleagues. Just make sure that you have your own warm-up routine. Make sure that you are also well rested and that you've eaten well. And avoid dehydration by drinking enough liquids. Never ever tell the audience that you are nervous. That can destroy audience confidence, and that can cause them to worry about you, and it can also destroy confidence in yourself. When we move on to the agenda point number 3 of maintaining audience interest, we need to make sure that we keep the audience engaged, interest, we're appealing to their intellect, and we're appealing to their emotions as well. So let's have a look at how we do that. There are a couple of techniques that we can use in order to ensure that we engage and maintain the audience interest. You should always make sure that the techniques you use are culturally appropriate and match the audience level. Refer to the benefits for the audience by relating your presentation's content and the key messages to their roles and responsibilities or interests. For example, after attending this presentation, they'll be able to make better presentations themselves. Involve the audience by making opportunities for them to participate. Ask questions, encourage discussions, build rapport with the audience by acknowledging their contributions, and also showing them that you value them. Use your voice effectively to create interest. Again, vary your tone. Use visual cues such as pointing to items on the slide. Provide regular summaries and signposts in the form of an agenda, explanations of what you will cover next, and summaries of what you have already covered. Use examples and anecdotes or stories to add interest and a link to real-life situations. People remember what is real. Use persuasive and positive language. For example, use we to include the audience members. A couple of questions we need to ask ourselves are, what benefits do you gain from attending this presentation? And ask that of the audience to ensure that you are already at the beginning of the presentation beginning to engage them. When we move on to appealing to their intellect, there are two aspects. We need to appeal to their intellect and appeal to their emotions. Everyone has an intellectual or rational mindset. It is more developed in some people than others, but every presentation should include content that appeals to the intellect. To make sure that your audience understands and accepts your key messages, you need to appeal to this. To appeal to intellect, you must have information that is concise, complete, and correct. Because the information needs to be concise in a presentation, you might want to provide additional information in the form of a handout. Objective facts that can be verified. Make sure that you've tested them yourself beforehand. Concrete benefits that relate to the audience's needs. If possible, these should be visible and time-bound. Supporting data or evidence that substantiates the information and facts. Supporting data can also be in the form of supporting arguments. When we appeal to the emotions, we can use vivid images and word pictures to illustrate the facts that you have in your presentation. Just research has shown that although most people use facts and logic to justify their actions and decisions, many of them are actually more influenced by their emotions. Therefore, you've got to appeal to your emotions as well as the intellect. Provide familiar examples to which the audience can relate, and this is why it is so important to actually analyze your audience and understand their demographic so that you can use the appropriate examples. Leverage off common beliefs and shared values. Use repetition judiciously. Repeating words or sentences emphasizes them. One must be careful, however, not to do this too often, as it can become annoying. Use positive and optimistic language and avoid negative. Believe in what you are presenting and show it by your enthusiasm, your energy, and your own emotions as well. Energy and enthusiasm are infectious. So it is important that you do exhibit this, and it must be genuine. When we look at tips for maintaining audience interest, there are 3 different phases for engaging your audience and maintaining their interest: before the presentation, during the presentation, and obviously after the presentation. It's a process that starts before you deliver the presentation. While you're preparing, consider how you can raise the interest level of the potential audience. Try and obtain endorsements and encouragement from the managers and leaders of your potential audience. During the presentation, be sensitive to the reactions shown by the participants. Do they look bored? Are they indifferent? Are they interested? Are they friendly or hostile? Respond to these visible signs. Show respect for the members of the audience, but at the same time, maintain control. After the presentation, make sure that you follow up with answers to any outstanding questions or requests for more information. One can maintain control by following the agenda and avoid getting sidetracked. You can list any questions that are asked to you. One of the techniques that we use is by using a flip chart and calling it a parking lot. So any questions that cannot be answered straight away, we park in the parking lot to be answered at a later stage. It is important after the presentation to answer these questions. When we have a look at body language and voice control, it is how we speak to people, how we manage our voice, how we appear to them, as well as how we conduct ourselves with the audience. There are a couple of key factors with body language and appearance. There are 3 aspects of communicating, in fact. Visual, which is the way that you dress, your body gestures, the way you walk, the way you handle your environment, and eye contact. Vocal, the way that you use your voice, the volume with which you speak, the speed, the pitch, tone, and silence. And verbal, what you say, the content, idea, language, and data. Body language is the most important statement a presenter makes. Consider while you are talking, what is your body saying? The audience receives certain impressions from body language, not all of them what the presenter intends. Your body language and voice always gives a message, and it must be congruent with your words, or else it will confuse and distract. If you want your audience to be excited about your topic, you must be excited about it too. Ask yourself, do I seem happy? Ask yourself, what message am I conveying to the audience? And of course, smile as often as you can, at the appropriate moments, of course. When we have a look at body movement, think about the presentations that you've made in the past. What types of movements did you use? Were they effective or were they distracting? Did they look natural or were they forced? Or did you not move at all? One must also be mindful of cultural considerations. You do not want to put your hand in your pocket when presenting, as it could be perceived as a sign of lack of respect. It might be considered improper to sit or lean on a table while presenting. So one needs to recognize and break down the bad habits that we have, such as dancing feet, standing with your weight on just one leg, holding, shaking, or playing with an object such as a permanent marker or a flip chart marker that you are holding. So one needs to select a style of movement that is appropriate to your purpose and your audience. One must practice the body movements until they come naturally, and do it in front of a mirror. People might think that you do look a little bit crazy, but it will help you in the long run. Also, ask your friends for feedback so that you are getting honest feedback and that your body language is congruent. When we have a look at eye involvement, as it says on the slide, an eye says as much as a mouth does. Eye communication is important in every culture. However, different cultures feel comfortable with different time lengths of eye contact. In some cultures, eye contact indicates disrespect Therefore, you need to be aware of cultural differences, which is why it is so important, again, to know your audience. There is a difference in eye contact between intimacy or intimidation. If we keep eye contact for too long, it could be misinterpreted and perhaps even be seen as aggressive. Just a second's difference makes a huge impact. Engage in many one-on-one eye contact conversations with the audience. Avoid scanning them all fast and at once, but rather move around and randomly choose different people to talk with. Spend a few seconds of eye contact and then move to someone else. In a smaller group, look into the white space so as not to overwhelm your audience. When we have a look at using our voice effectively in a presentation, our voice needs to be interesting, powerful, and appropriate to the topic and the audience. Pace is how fast or slow you speak. Volume, how loudly or quietly you speak. Pitch, whether you emit low or high sounds. Energy, the tone of your voice. Do you sound energetic or do you sound tired? Sentences, are they well constructed and are they meaningful sentences? A louder voice can be used for emphasis, excitement, or a climax. A softer voice can be used for contrast. Pitch can be used to emphasize an important word or a sentence. And using a pause is a powerful technique, especially for those who speak fast. What is incredibly useful is listening to yourself speak. If you've never heard yourself speak or listened, make a recording and assess how well you use your voice. Think about a memorable speaker you've heard and deconstruct his or her voice to determine what made them so powerful. A couple of tips when it comes to vocal skills. You should speak clearly so that your audience understands what you are saying. However, you must also keep your voice as natural as possible. Use speed or pace to convey excited, fast action, to be relaxed, slow action according to your objectives. Remember, your voice affects the audience perception of you as a presenter. In addition to the vocal attributes we discussed on the previous slide, it's also important to speak naturally and use variety in the speed, tone, and volume. Be aware of the vocal pitfalls, as it were. Do not speak in a monotone. Do not speak too loudly or too softly, too fast or too slowly. Avoid using slang or colloquialisms. Using non-words such as Avoid annoying mannerisms. And try avoid having distracting background noises when you're in a telephone conference or a virtual presentation. The good thing to ask yourself is, what annoys you? One of the exercises that I would like you to do, and you only need to spend about 3 minutes doing it, is to look at the cultural differences in body language and voice control. What is acceptable and unacceptable body language? What is acceptable and unacceptable eye contact? Acceptable and unacceptable language? Acceptable and unacceptable use of jokes or humor? So after this presentation, go back and have a look at that and do some research. We move on to managing audience expectations and interactions. So getting started, one of the key aspects is to set clear expectations for the presentation, including the guidelines for any interaction. Create an issues list on a flip chart or a whiteboard and explain that you will list anything that is out of scope or needs more research or follow-up. Be ready to start on time. Punctuality indicates that you have respect for your audience. Establish your own credibility and your own credentials, but do not spend too much time on your own work history or qualification. Clarify the purpose of the presentation and make sure that it is understood. Always provide an agenda of what you are going to cover during the presentation. Explain how you will handle questions. One of the key things we need to ask ourselves as well is, how long should we wait for late arrivals after the scheduled time? Again, this is very dependent on the culture that you are presenting to, but again, it will vary. Always get off to a good start with your audience. Remember, you are taking your audience on a journey. They need more information before they can feel comfortable. So give as much information up front as you are able to set them at ease. When we look at audience questions, we need to ask ourselves, are audience questions really a good thing? And the answer to that is yes. Allowing the audience to ask questions is an excellent way to reinforce your message and continue to sell your ideas. In addition, because listeners can ask for clarification, audience members are less likely to leave your presentation with misconceptions about the concept you delivered. Because of these benefits, the question and answer period is a very important part of most presentations. Questions are useful because they provide an opportunity for you to add the content that is relevant for the particular audience. They enable you to introduce more detail and clarity. And obviously, your ability to answer questions builds your credibility. Always remember to remain in control when you are answering your questions. Do not let the audience start dictating how the questions are answered. One needs to remain in control at all times. Make sure that you are the person answering. Politely but firmly explain that you cannot answer questions that are out of scope. We move on how to answer questions. Make sure that you understand the question before you answer it. Never interrupt part of the way through the question with a quick answer. If the audience is not asking any questions, encourage them. Ask questions such as, what questions do you have, rather than, are there any questions? Provide an opportunity for questions by saying, we have time for 3 or 4 questions. Start the process by saying, people usually ask me about. Again, once someone has asked you the question, perhaps it would be useful to repeat the question back to them to ensure that you are understanding what they are saying. Clarifying the question, again, adds to your credibility. Verify with a follow-up to make sure that your answer is understood as well. We'll move on to handling questions. Set expectations at the beginning of the presentation on how you will handle questions. Are you going to handle them any time during the presentation, at the end of each module, or at the end of the presentation? Choosing to answer questions during the presentation requires that you are reasonably confident about your content and your audience management skills as well. Do not pretend that you know the answer when you do not. It is much better to refer the question to someone else or say that you will follow up. Avoid having questions turn into discussions or debates. Use the agenda to focus the audience back on the purpose and content of the presentation to make sure that you remain within scope. We move on to challenging audience behavior. When dealing with difficult audience behavior, one needs to acknowledge and agree with something and then move on. Observe the group dynamics and their behavior. How are other members of the audience reacting to a know-it-all, to a heckler, or a complainer? Now, a know-it-all is a person who shows their knowledge at your expense or at others of the audience. Some know-it-alls have useful contributions to make. You may want to follow up after the presentation with the true expert, but thank them, acknowledge the time constraints that you have, and move on. Hecklers are people who interrupt. They're generally impolite or try and dominate their discussion or others. Listen Agree with a small point, thank them, and move on. Ask the audience for feedback and move the conversation offline if the heckling continues. Complainers are people, obviously, who complain a lot. If the complaint is off topic, suggest that it be taken elsewhere to whoever can deal with it. Again, listen calmly, but do not start a debate. Ask them to be specific. Agree with the part, thank them, and move on. Silence. People who do not say anything at all, observe their body language to see if they are paying attention. Ask them a question to verify that they are listening. A change of pace or a story or an anecdote is a good way to arouse interest. If everyone is silent, ask an open question. Engage their interest with a change of voice or a story. If individuals are silent, consider their command of the language. Include them when you call on several people for an opinion as well. Another activity that one can do after this presentation is amongst your friends, your colleagues, what are the best ways to manage audience expectations? And here, draw on your own experiences, and you can also draw on their experiences. And what are the best ways to manage audience interaction? Think back to a presenter handling audience interactions well and one that handled it badly. What would you do differently? What would you do in that type of situation? That brings us to our conclusion. Let us go back quickly and have a look at the agenda to see that we have covered all the important points today. We've had a look at the introduction, we've had a look at presentation preparation and how important preparation is. We've had a look at how to maintain audience interest, how to make sure that we engage them and that they remain interested throughout the presentation. We've had a look at body language and voice control. We've had a look at managing their expectations and their interactions to ensure that they derive the most benefit from the presentation. And we've had a look at the conclusion. So now let's have a look at our action plan. Reflect on your own presentation skills. Write down 3 to 5 strengths and write down 2 or 3 weaknesses. Create an action plan for continued improvement. What are you going to do to enhance your strengths? What are you going to do to minimize your weaknesses? Don't be afraid to engage with your colleague when doing this. They will be able to provide you with valuable input as well. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Just as we have gone on a journey today through this presentation skills presentation, so will you go on a journey when you present to other people. And with that in mind, good luck with your next presentation.